So once again, we're very grateful for Mechthild coming forward with her presentation, and we're looking forward to it immensely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here at EVA. I've been here repeatedly and I have the greatest admiration for what this organization is doing for the electronic media arts. I'm a professor at NYU and my own research is in the, oops, hold on, my own research is in engaged media. What I mean with engaged media is that I use my media skills for social or mostly actually ecological problems or means. I try to look for engagement at a local level. I look at local actions and I see art as a participatory medium where we can maybe reach some audiences that are not as prone to listen to science or journalism. So I think it could be another approach to build awareness of the dangers of climate change. So I'm using digital storytelling and I'm using a device that everybody knows, in this case, Google Earth mapping, but I add my own layers to it and give it some interactive possibilities. And in this case, I want to talk to you about TreeStory, which grew out of my research for my Fulbright grant, 2019-20, unfortunately slightly abbreviated because of COVID, but I got all my research done, just not all of the physical project. That was in Bangalore. And I thought this was a very sensitive issue coming as a Western European US woman to India. It's like, what am I going to do about raising awareness? I'm not going to go and say, oh, maybe one could do this or that. And so I thought foremost, I have to listen and learn and be sensitive to the needs and also to the other artistic activities in that area. So I spent a lot of time working with other artists, learning what is being done. And the topic narrowed itself down to the topic of trees. Just 1 second, when I have the Zoom on, it doesn't. Okay, so these are some of my collaborators. From the left, there's Arzu Mistry, who is a co-founder of Art in Transit, working at different transit stations in Bangalore with art installations. And the man at the end of the table just serving food is one Shanti gallery owner, Suresh Jayaram. His ancestors were actually involved in botanical work, research, and so on. And you also see our group down there in the Lalbagh Gardens. What is specific about Bangalore is it is about 800 meters high, so it has a slightly cooler climate. And all these avenue trees that were first started out in Mughal times and then were planted during the British colonial times gave the city a microclimate of some cooling and a much better air quality, and that is in danger. It is in danger because the city grew like tenfold in about 100 years. It's now the sort of Indian Silicon Valley, so to speak, and it attracted a lot of people moving there and a lot of related industries. So the traffic is horrific and the city urgently needed to build a metro line. Now a metro line underground is a lot more costly than a metro line overground. So there was a very difficult question, how can we do that? And I wanted to quickly add, since Kew Gardens is here and I'm in London, a lot of the trees were actually shipped from like Pacific locations to Kew Gardens to get acclimatized, to get research and shipped back to Bangalore to be planted there and to see how they could be useful in a decorative sense or in a scientific sense. And they planted a lot of avenue trees with successive bloom along the avenues, making it a lot cooler there rather than having the sun hit the asphalt. So now a lot of those trees, about 1,000 of them, were being cut down, and streets are widened. And you see in this image the discrepancy of the wonderfully cared for trees in Lalbagh Gardens on your right, and right outside that wall separates Lalbagh Gardens from the street. Before, that was one of the trees that was left standing in completely compounded dirt and garbage and so on. So there was a, hold on. Here you have a better view of the wall separating Lalbagh from the newly constructed high line, I should say. And the difficulty is you're pitting one ecological need, that of public transportation, against another to preserve the trees. And I acknowledge that that is a conflict, but I imagined a conversation between the trees. Here you see a Google Earth image from 2000 versus 2019. So you see where the line is running now used to be all, trees. To the right is the Lalbagh Garden, the botanical garden, where we did our research, and the Lalbagh Metro, where we were going to have a large installation. That did not happen because of COVID. We got until like March 8, and then that was the end of it. I did some research. I looked at what kind of trees were there, what kind of trees were eliminated, and then I imagine that we have lost the ability to relate to nature because we're in a city full of cement, full of tar, full of stone, and nature doesn't really play a role. So I thought if these trees could talk and if these trees could communicate with us, not just about their beauty, but also about everything that we derive from them in terms of seeds, in terms of medicine, in terms of cultural value, maybe we would have a better appreciation for them. So that's what I tried to do in that talk. So on Google Earth, I have this imagined conversation where the trees that originating in Lalbagh send their seeds over to the denuded streets and replant themselves and basically whisper about all their talents and everything that they can do for us. For us as a user, we can go onto Google Earth, turn some of these layers on and off. Each layer has links to that particular tree where you can find out a little bit more about it. There's also room for commentary if people want to make their own version of the KMZ file. Here are again some excerpts of all the, I have about 3,000 photographs or something. It shows some of those that are representative and that are useful. Obviously, it's a fiction. They don't see themselves and not on, predetermined lines, but that is the story that I was trying to imagine here. Including also a lot of quotes of wise voices, I call them, from around the world, and not restricted to the Indian subcontinent. And to look at the symbiotic relationship that we do have with nature and that we should appreciate. Here you see again, the yellow is where the line is running, and again, the same overhead view. So I imagine that this conversation would take in about 100 years because that's how long it takes for a tree to be, again, fully mature and giving the shade and giving the fruit that were lost in felling them. If you are online right now and want to participate in this, you can go to Mechthild and download the KMZ file. It's on the homepage. If you download the KMZ file, you can drop it into Google Earth and then do this journey with us. So here's just a short video of the trip down into Bangalore in case you cannot get Google Earth up in time to view. So these are all the layers that I introduced there, flying down into the park, and different layers can come on and off, and you can look at them. You can either look at it passively as a linear video, or much better actually look at the different layers and look at the different levels of information that you can find behind it and maybe add to it. And you can send me an updated version. I'll be very happy to see that. That is the last one of my slides. Just a quick note to some of the resources that I used and some of the organizations that I frequented. There's a lot more. I just told you basically from the end, the tree topic. Before I arrived at the tree topic, I did a lot more research and traveled around and found a lot of other interesting projects, but they go beyond the time frame that we have here. So let me now go see that I quit the right thing. Okay, now we're on Google Earth. And I like to go back to the beginning of the story. So it starts with a little explanation, a little background at what we're looking here. And you can see Bangalore, in case you don't know, is like in the sort of center of southern India. And I was affiliated with the Schmidt School of Design, Architecture, and it was wonderful. They have a wonderful curriculum. That's also for another day, but I truly admired the way they are studying there. So a lot of links for you to pursue. And then the same dive that you just saw into the garden is here interactively. And so we can go around here and turn levels on and off. And mainly these groups, when you go into any of the layers, you just use control. What's that on a PC? Also control, right? So you control click the layer and you go to get info, and then you find some more information about the tree and links where you can go for this specific tree, in this case an Ashoka tree. And you can add your own notes, save it, and then save it out as your own file. It won't destroy my file, but I'd love to hear it if anyone is interested. So it is a little easier to see when not all the layers are on at the same time. So we can turn them on or off. What I really like is the way Google Earth lets me add these layers. I researched a bit to make this transparent, because otherwise the default is like the text box you saw on the initial slide. You just have a text box that covers everything. And so you can actually, and if you have the layer on the ground, it follows the undulation of the various. The interactivity is a tad laggy because we're going via Zoom. So, when you turn some off, you can read the rest a little bit easier. That is pretty much my presentation. I have other works in the whole series of engaged media. There's another Google Earth project about refugees. I spent a month in near Moria on Lesbos in 2017 and traced some of the journeys of some of the refugees. You'll find them on there. You find that on my website. And I also do work that is not based on Google Earth, but I really enjoy the opportunity to work in there and to add my layering and my imagery to this. So I would be happy to take some questions if you have any, or if you have any requests where you want me to go on here, I can do that. Thank you very much. Yes.
Could you just say something about the significance of the layers? So what's the difference between, just so I understand it a bit more, the difference between like very, very high versus low, does that have a, does it relate to the meaning of the text itself? Or
Yes,
the work?
because we want, I should probably get the microphone.
Sorry, I'll bring it back.
So the meaning is mainly aesthetic, because when you come from the outset, I didn't want to have just a layer glued to the ground. I want to give the feeling that we're diving down into the whole area, and the dive down is sort of a preparation for what's going to come. And I think it is visually more interesting. Some of the layers, they clip when you go in, but the good thing is that I wanted them to clip and to go past them, because otherwise the bottom becomes completely unreadable. All the layers on top are these are of quotations of people that I looked up, and there is anything from Hermann Hesse to Mahatma Gandhi to Pope Francis, Vandana Shiva, all the voices around the globe, to not focus it solely on India, that are warning us that it's time to do something about the environment, and not to put that off, and not to, in order to tie the problem into the global problem that it is, because it is not a problem of the metro in Bangalore, it's a problem of us humans disregarding nature and basically sawing off the branch that we're sitting on, in order to stay with the tree analogy. And yeah, that is the reason. So it's aesthetic. And it helps with the storytelling to sort of slowly get into it. Sorry.
You speak beautifully on behalf of trees.
There are many. I don't just one more voice.
I've been to Bangalore. I've never really stayed there, but if there is one place that needs a voice speaking on behalf of the very few green spaces there, it is Bangalore.
Yeah, and it raises the surface temperature by several degrees,
Yeah.
not to have trees there, you know, so it makes an already heat problematic city even more so.
And as we've just got a few moments to spare, I can just mention other comments about India. I've been there many times, and staying further north, there are fewer deciduous trees up north, and we happen to be staying in a place where the person who used to be the Maharaja of the particular area was also staying. We became very friendly, and he was bemoaning the fact that when the British left and so on, all the planting in his wonderful state had literally begun to disappear. And what had overtaken the area was the most vicious thorn bushes you could ever come across. I went a walk one day round the grounds, and my t-shirt was literally torn to pieces.
Was that in the Deccan
Yeah,
Heights?
it was
Because
up
that
there.
is- yeah.
It was up there, yes. It was a unsatisfactory walk, and the trees attacked me, to be honest. So that's why your work and what you've been saying on behalf of Bangalore is so very much important.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. You again.
I just wonder what the, we talked about the colonial heritage. So lots of these trees you mentioned were planted by the English. And then there's a kind of, so there's an overplanting of whatever was there before. And then there's this overwriting, literally, of the lands and people's houses and all of those things. What is the connection to the locality, and how can people there actually engage, and how can you resist these other colonial practices that are often, like Google Google Earth itself represents a kind of privatization of the globe and people's spaces and lives. How do we resist that with this technology? Sorry for just chuck that one in there.
No, that is a very good question. I am more interested in nature, and the tree doesn't care what the politics around it are. So I'm grateful for the tree that was planted. But of course, there is a question of invasive species and of trees not acclimatized to the climate in India, trees that were imported from, I don't know, New Zealand and so on. But in those times, I think people were less sensitive to the idea of invasive species. Of course, colonial times have a lot to be critical about. In terms of the trees, I would say there was some good that was done. For instance, all these avenue trees that were planted by one of the directors, who just happened to be a German actually, but he was hired by Kew Gardens. And then those where, you know, the trees were just used as to make money, basically. So what grows fastest, what can we sell? So there are different kinds of motivations behind it. But when you look at the whole Lalbagh area, when you go to the south here, there's a whole community where you find a lot of gardeners and green spaces. And the person I mentioned before, the gallery owner from One Shanti Road, his ancestors have actually been working in gardening. And there's, when you look at the different languages around there, they came all from a group that moved to Lalbagh in order to do to promote the native species. They know about the healing properties of some of the trees and plants. I'm not sure how maintained that is until today, but that's their origin. And they were also employed by the gardens. So I think there's some mixture of, you know, original wisdom from the land and colonial intentions that were sort of overlaid. I haven't really looked into the political aspects of it, but it's a good point. But I know that they were there and that they are still there. But they and the community around there were large protests to cut these trees down. They just, the protest just didn't match the lobby of the people who wanted to build the metro line and who said we cannot afford to put it underground. And anyway, if you put it underground, you probably have to fell the trees first also, or some of them. So it's not a very easy question. I cannot condemn the metro because it's really needed. And at the same time, I would love to protect the trees or see them protected, maybe at least in some of the surrounding places. Some of the residential places are quite green, but not all of them. A lot of them need wider streets, and you see trees with the roots basically in the asphalt and asphalted over, so that tree is not going to live for much longer.
Thank you very much for a brilliant presentation, Mechthild. I think the slight bonus you received for stepping in to this slot at the last minute was that you were able to present you had a little longer to present your information.
Oh, I didn't look at the clock. That is a permanently weak point of mine.
You didn't need to. We wanted you to go on. So thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah.
And
Bookstore under blogs.
we're all going to look at it now.
Yes.
Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Under blogs, you find India 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much.
I just say